Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica. It's release day for block number 2 in our 2025 Sew With Me series. So if you missed our first kickoff video and block number 1, make sure to go back and watch those. I'll make sure that is linked below this video. I've also created a playlist for our 2025 Sew With Me series as well. So you can always click that playlist and then see all of the videos that are released there as well. Today's video is going to be just slightly different because we're actually going to be making 2 blocks. These are the blocks that are going to go with our border sashing that we created in the first video. And so we're going to create one for the front of our quilt, and if you're doing the piece backing, we're also going to create one for the back of our quilt, and I have something special for that one that I want to show you. But let's go ahead and get started. So here's what the front block is going to look like. It's a fun star block, and then as you can see, we've got our bow ribbons hanging down into this block. This will all make sense when we put everything together, but you're going to have your bow unit at the top, the special sashing unit, and then this block, and they'll all line up perfectly and have a really cute little bow with some sashing strips hanging down. So this is the block for the front. And then if you're doing the piece backing, we're also going to make a second block. So this is just an Ohio star block. Again, we've got our ribbons hanging down, but in the center there, as you can see, I thought it would be fun to add a quilt label. So I'll show you how to do that in today's video as well. So let's go ahead and get started with today's tutorial and get these cute blocks made. Don't forget to download the free PDF for today's tutorial. It will be in the description box below this video. I'll also put a link for our Sew With Me group there as well. If you join that group, it is a private group and we can all share our whips and progress as we sew along together. So let's go ahead and get started with today's video. Alright, so I have all of my pieces for block number 2 ready to go, and this is one of the bow units. So I just wanted to give you a little reminder that I'm using the same red and pink that I used in my previous bow unit that we made in the previous video. So I'm going to set all my pieces aside and we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to start off by making the bow unit. So we're going to take our I and our G squares, and we're going to sew a G square to the bottom of both of the I rectangles. Now we need to make opposite units for this, so we need a left unit and a right unit. So for those, we're going to be sewing in opposite directions. So I'm going to sew from the inner corner to the outer corner on both of these so that we have opposite pointing units when we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and take these to the machine, and I keep them at the machine so I can make sure that they're going the right way. So again, inner corner to outer corner. And then I'm going to turn this one, so I'm going inner corner to outer corner. And these diagrams are all in the pattern, so I'm going to trim 1/4 inch away from my stitch line on both pieces, and then we'll go ahead and press those. Alright, so now we have our opposite facing units, and these will be nesting with the unit that goes next to them. So for these, I'm pressing towards the pink. In the pattern, you'll see there are instructions on which way to press everything. You're going to want to follow those to make sure your blocks nest. Next, we're going to take our J and H units, and we're going to sew those together. Just like that, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam, and I've got 2 of each, so we're going to have 2 identical units. And these I'm going to press towards the red. If there are no instructions as far as which way to press, go ahead and just press towards the dark fabric. So we have these 2 units made. The next thing we're going to work on are half square triangles. For those, we're going to need our E, N, and O squares. And what we're going to do is place one of the green squares onto the background fabric right side down and do the same with the other. We're going to take these to the sewing machine and sew around all 4 corners on both, and then we're going to come back and cut them in half on the diagonal. If it makes you feel better, you can draw the diagonal lines on here. I'm just going to use my ruler to do that. Next, I'm just setting my seams first. I like to do this before I cut them apart. That way I don't have to do it on each one individually once they're cut. I'm going to go ahead and place these right on top of each other, and we're going to cut them all at the same time. So I'm using this diagonal line right here on my ruler, and I'm just placing that right along one of the edges of my fabric. Actually need a little bit of a longer ruler, but this one will do. And then I'm placing the corner right at the corner of my stitch line. We're just going to cut in half diagonally that way. I'm not moving anything, and we're going to do the same thing this way. And this time you can also use a line along this center seam. I also gave you plenty of room on these to trim them down to size. So if you're off just by a little bit, it's not a big deal. I'm bringing them all over to my pressing board. We're going to press towards the dark. And now we have all of our half square triangles made. We just need to trim them to size. These need to be 2.5 by 2.5. I gave you plenty of room, as you can see here, to trim those up. So what I like to do is place the diagonal line on my ruler right on that diagonal seam line, and then I want to make sure that my 2.5-inch marks are right there as well on those seams. And then I'll trim off 2 sides, just like that. Rotate, and then do the same thing. But now again, I have 3 sides I can use to line my ruler up, and just make sure that everything is nice and straight. And then we have a perfect half square triangle. Even if your sewing was a little bit wonky, when you give yourself extra room like that, it makes it a lot easier. You can trim them down perfectly, even if your sewing isn't perfect. All right, I've trimmed up all of my half square triangles, and now we can move on to the next step. So we're going to take 3 away from each pile so that we just have 1 of each left. We're going to follow the directions in our pattern, and we're going to sew a K-square to the top opposite corners. These are going to match up with our bow units. So you're going to want to follow your pattern instructions very carefully for this one. We're going to place them in opposite corners, and we're going to sew again from the inside to the outside edge right along that diagonal line. Again, we're going to trim 1/4 of an inch away, and then when we press that out, we'll have that corner. And before you trim these, you may want to just press your corner out, compare it to the diagram in the pattern, just to make sure that you've gone the correct way with your corner. All right, and here we have our left and our right star tip units. These are probably the trickiest units in them all, just because you want to make sure they're going the right way. And then we can just go ahead and set these aside, and we're going to use our other half square triangles now. And we're going to take 2 of the half square triangles from the lighter green and 2 from the darker green. We're going to make our bottom star tips. We're going to use our F, L, and M squares to make the bottom star points. So I'm just going to go with the darker color first. So we're going to, again, following the diagram in the pattern, we're going to use one of our F squares, 2 of our half square triangles, and then their coordinating L piece. We're going to have 1 left, so set that aside. And we're going to sew these together. We're going to sew the top and bottom together, and then we'll come and sew those 4 together. We're going to repeat that with the lighter colored. So I like to stack these on top of each other just so that I know I'm making the same unit. And then I'm going to take this all to the machine, and I'll chain piece all of these together. All right, so here's my 2 units, and I do apologize, my camera wasn't filming for that little segment. So all I did was sew these right side together, and then I pressed them in opposite directions. So you can see here I pressed the top one going towards the green and the bottom one going towards the white. I'm going to now place those right sides together, and then as you'll see here, our seams are going in opposite directions, so they'll nest. So when we sew right along this edge, we'll have a nice point right there in the center. And then we can just trim those apart, and then we can press them. And this one doesn't matter which way you press. All right, and then here are our 2 corner units. And these look pretty good, but I will just go ahead and trim them up just in case. Okay, so here's our 2 bottom units. We can set these aside. All right, next we're going to work on the bow unit. So we're going to take our 2 opposite pieces. We're going to sew a C rectangle to the outside edge of them, so just make sure you have them going in the correct direction. So I just like to place this on here. Sometimes I'll even place a pin on this side so I know that that's the side that I'm sewing on. That way I know when I get to my machine that I'm sewing down this outside edge. I'm going to go ahead and just press these towards the white fabric this time, just because there's no seams on that one, and our other one has a seam on it. Next, we're going to sew together the inner bow units. So we're going to have our left and right pieces that we just made with the greens. The dark green's going to go on the right, the light green's going to go on the left, and we're just going to sew these two pieces together. So again, I'm just going to flip these down right side down. And one thing I like to do to make sure that I'm going to have a nice point right there is find my 1/4 inch in, and I'm eyeballing this. Bend this back about 1/4 inch and just make sure that those seams line up just like that. I'm going to take my pin and place it just about 1/4 inch right on that seam line. And then I'm also pinning it right where the red and white fabric meet there. And then I'm going to just pin that in place. That way, as I'm sewing along, I know that those seams are going to line up perfectly. Just make sure that lines up. Okay, and we're just going to take these to the machine and sew 1/4 inch down that edge. All right, and here are our pieces. That one looks pretty good. And if it's off a little bit, you can always pick it out and fix it. So I think those came together pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and just press these up towards this red and white piece because there are less seams on there, and it's not going to matter that it's going next to our bow unit, so that won't matter. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now we just need to sew these two units together. So again, I'm just going to place them right sides together, and then we're just going to sew down this edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, and these look like they came together pretty well. These even lined up really good. These don't have to be perfect because technically they're supposed to be two different ribbons. So if they don't line up perfectly, it's okay. I am going to go ahead again and just trim up this unit. Next, we're going to take our half square triangle and our coordinating L and M pieces. We're going to sew these together, and then we'll sew them to the bottom of these to complete the star point for the bow unit. I'm just going to press towards that solid square. It has less seams, and also it will nest with our bow unit. All right, and then we can sew these two units together. And again, because I pressed this to the left, this one was pressed towards the right. Those should nest nicely. We can stick a pin if we like. Take these to the machine and sew along the edge 1/4 inch. All right, so we're almost done. We're going to take our darker star point with the bow and put it to the right. The lighter one is going to be on the left. We're going to sew that together with a D rectangle. We're going to sew this center row of a C, K, C together, and then we're going to sew our bottom row with the dark, a C, and the light star point together, and then we'll sew all those rows together. Now we can take this center piece and line it up, and you're just going to make sure that those center seams nest. Because that's the one I care about, I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin right there. We're going to sew that on, press that out, and we'll come back and add this piece. And then we can take our last one. Again, make sure those center seams nest. Just going to throw a pin there to keep it in place. You can also pin these outer edges if you want. All right, we're almost done. We're going to take our A strips, sew that to both sides, and then we'll take our B strip and sew that to the bottom. Trim this up to 12.5 by 12.5, and we're done with today's block. All right, here's our finished block. I just went ahead and trimmed it up really quickly and pressed it, and that's it for block number 2. The other block we're going to work on today, because it's very similar to the one we just did, is the backing bow block. Now if you don't want to do the piece backing, you can skip this block, but I thought I'd show you how I'm putting mine together. So I've already gone ahead and put together the bow units because I put them together the same exact way that I did block number 2. So we're going to set those aside. And then here are the rest of my pieces. And for piece number E, this is the center piece for our Ohio star, I wanted to just show you, I cut out my square the size that it was supposed to be. I found a label that would fit inside. You could also make your own label. I stitched it on. This label is just from my Sweetwater tag subscription, so it's ready to go. Now I'm going to sew this right into the block just like I would if there were no label on here. So this is just still piece E, but I added a label to it. I thought that would be a really cute place to add a label on the back of the quilt. The rest of the block is really easy to put together, but I did want to show you how to make the quarter square triangles. So you're going to be using your H, L, and M squares, and we're going to make quarter square triangles out of these for our Ohio Star. So we're going to take an H, we're going to place an L right side down on top, and then we're going to take an M and place the other L right side down on top. I am going to draw a line from corner to corner on the wrong side of these. It doesn't matter which one. Just like that. And we're going to take these to the sewing machine. We're going to sew 1/4 of an inch away on both sides of this line. And I also wanted to share this little tool with you. This is a Creative Grids seam guide. And what you can do is take that, place it from corner to corner, and then if you draw your lines that way, then you actually have lines drawn exactly 1/4 of an inch away from this center line. So 1/4 inch this way and this way. So that's also a handy little tool. I just thought I'd share it. I don't always use this, and as you guys all know, I typically use my diagonal seam tape on my machine. But whenever I have a piece that's longer like this, then I do go ahead and draw the lines because sometimes it'll run off my machine and I won't be able to line up this far edge because my tape isn't long enough. So we're going to take these over to our machine again, sew 1/4 of an inch away on both sides of our center line. I'm going to go ahead and just set that seam, and then we're going to trim these right down the middle or on your drawn line if you drew lines. I'm going to press towards my light green, and you just want to press towards the same color on all of them. So if you're doing a different color scheme than I am, that's totally fine. Just make sure you press them all toward the same fabric. You could also press these open. I'm not going to press mine open, and I'll show you why here. All right, now we're going to take 2 different squares, so the one that has the background in the light green and the dark green in the light green. So you want these 2 to be the same. Unless you're going for scrappy, then they can all be different. And we're going to place the light green opposite of each other. And I'm going to just feel in there and just nest those seams. So this one's pressed this way, this one's pressed this way, so I can really feel those seams. And what we're going to do is sew this way now, so that when you pull this back, you've got a quarter square triangle. But we want to do 2. And so I'm going to just line those up. I'm also for these going to pin because I want these seams to stay in place. So I'm just feeling with my fingers that they're nested. And then I'm going to draw a line from corner to corner again. So I'm going to do that to both of them, and we're going to take those again over to my machine and sew 1/4 of an inch on both sides. And you may want to just double check this before you cut these. But if I pull it back, I should have the darkened background opposite and the same light green. And when we cut them, we'll have 2 of each. So that looks good. So I'm just going to cut them apart because I chain pieced. We're going to trim them in half down the center. Now this one's not really going to matter which way you press. I'm going to press towards this dark side. Just give them a quick press. By the way, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm using my Laura Star steam iron. I love it. It gets these blocks so nice and flat. The other thing that really helps is my tailor's clapper. This is my 12x12 tailor clapper. This is from Mav Modern American Vintage, and I did a giveaway for one of these during our holiday gift giveaways this year, and oh my gosh, this thing is so amazing. You can see here, I had it sitting on here until it cooled, and look at how lovely and flat this block is. So highly recommend. So this is what we want our finished block to look like. So we need to trim all of these up. And as you can see, I gave you plenty of space to trim these up. And I like doing that on these because they can get a little wonky, and I just like having a little wiggle room. So to trim these up, I like to use a square Creative Grids ruler. It doesn't really matter what size it is. If you have the exact square that you need, that's awesome. A lot of times you don't. So I'm going to show you both ways to do it. So first I'm going to show you with the 3.5 inch square. This is the size that we need. And as you can see, I've got my diagonal line lined up along that seam line. I'm also going to try and make sure that each one of these points at my corners is coming right to that seam line right there as well. So I'm lining up all 4 corners plus this diagonal. then we can trim all the way around. And here we have a relatively perfect quarter square triangle. So that's that one. If you don't have the right size, which most of the time you don't, let's face it, and you don't want to go out and buy new rulers for every single thing, you can take a larger ruler than what you need. We need 3.5 by 3.5. So I'm just going to be working with these. Pretend like the rest of your ruler doesn't exist. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to line up my diagonal line right here along this seam, and then I'm going to take each point where my 3.5 inches is and try and line those up with all of the seam lines. And that looks pretty good to me. Now with this one, you're going to cut off 2 sides and then we're going to turn it. Okay, so those 2 are done. We're going to turn it all the way around and again line up our 3.5 by 3.5. This time it's a little bit easier because we can line up these edges. I also still just like to try and make sure everything looks good. All right, and there we go. All right, and now we have all 4 of our quarter square triangles and we can assemble our block. So we are going to arrange these so that the darker green is in the middle. And then we're going to take our E square with our label, place that in the center. The ribbons are going to come on the top up here. We've got a D square on both sides. We've got a B square up here on top. We have the F rectangles on both sides. And then finally, we'll have the G on the bottom. So how I'm going to assemble all this, and this is all in the pattern, is I'm going to take our first star point up here, sew the B onto that, and then also this whole top section together. Also this center row together, bottom row, sew all those rows together, and then I'll add my G at the end. So here are our rows. I did the top row, middle row, bottom row, and we still have our G, and now I just need to sew all of those rows together. Now when I do that, I'm just going to place this top row down onto the middle row, and these seams are going to nest if we pressed according to the pattern, but I do also like to stick a pin there just to make sure. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin there, and then at this junction as well. You can also stick a pin in the ends if you want, but you're going to sew right along this edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll flip this up, come back and add the same pinning right here at these junctions, and then we'll come back and add our bottom piece. All right, I've sewn all of the layers together, and here's our finished backing star. You could also use this as the front star if you'd like your label on the front, but I think that just turned out so cute. My label's already done, so I don't have to worry about it. And then here is the other block we made for the front of the quilt. So here are both blocks. They're totally interchangeable. The bow units are the same, and they'll work on either the front or the back. My label's going to go on the back, and this one's going to go on the front. Okay, let's take a quick look at our cross stitch for block number 2. So here's my center block, block number 2, and I'll just hold that up close for you guys to see. I'm having a lot of fun stitching this. I think it's going to be really cute when we're all done. I am continuing, because I started with it, to use my classic Colorworks floss palette. Here are the colors that I'm using, and then here are the DMC alternatives that I chose. They're not direct correlations, as you can see, but I just chose ones that I liked for the DMC and ones that I liked for the classic Colorworks, and it gives it a little bit of a brighter look. I think if you're going to go with the DMC floss, a little bit of a moodier look if you're going to go with the classic Colorworks floss. Of course, you can always use any floss that you like, but here is our progress for block number 2. All right, guys, that is it for block number 2. I hope you enjoyed that and learned something new. And again, if you don't want to do the piece blocking, you can skip this. You could also, these blocks are interchangeable, so you could also do this one on the front instead of the other one if you prefer, and you can even still add your quilt label to the front of your quilt as well. So you have a lot of flexibility in this week's block. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have any comments or questions, make sure to leave those below. Don't forget to join our Sew With Me group on Facebook, where everyone is sharing their fun progress. And make sure you subscribe to my channel. Click the thumbs up button for this video, and you can also hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any upcoming fun. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next month for block number 3. Today's going to be a little bit different. We're going to actually, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you in the next. So I've already gone ahead. Whew. Ah. Try that again. Okay, so here are our rows. Oh, why are you in there? And then I'll add my bottom G-strip. G-strip. I should change that letter. So you can make either one.
Can I talk to you?
In a minute.
I want work Crocs for my birthday.
Okay.
Everyone at work has them, and they literally just spray them off, and then they're just clean again.
Okay. Bye. Glad you interrupted me for that.